Hey, welcome to the Candid Sales Rep Podcast. And I'm Ken Lundin, your host. In this episode, I am absolutely fired up because we're going to talk with Lorraine Pettit. And she's got some stuff that you're going to want to hear because we're going to talk about how to achieve and maintain high performance in sales. But that's not it. She's going to share some of her personal experiences about how she's done the things she's done throughout the course of her career. We're also going to get into, some of the personal stuff and maybe the unusual way that Lorraine maybe came into sales. But listen, you're going to get valuable information, so just stick around. You'll hear more about her daily routines and, quite frankly, the way she thinks about going and doing her job. So with that, Lorraine, welcome to the show. It's awesome to have you.
Thank you so much, Ken. It's great to be here, and I'm super excited for the conversation today. I think we'll have a very excited lineup of subjects here, so definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a blast because, the very first thing I noticed when I was doing research was you may not have had that traditional start in sales, or it certainly may not look like it while you're at university that this was going to be the path. So tell me a little bit about how that transpired and how you even ended up in the world of sales.
For sure. So I hail from the Washington, D.C. area. That's where I'm originally from in the U.S. And essentially went to school, was really passionate about languages, also kind of picked up urban planning along the way. And essentially decided that maybe before I go to grad school to do this professionally, I should probably join a company to see what it's like in urban planning. That company ended up being Candid Screen. It's now called Action Figure. And at that business, I started using a product called Gong. And in that, I also was the only job I could really contribute was sales at the time because I was fresh out of being at university. I had lived in France for a year ahead of time as well. And so when I was there, I got really excited about this platform and this product. And I didn't really even kind of blew my mind that was even something that could exist of recording, transcribing, understanding conversations, and got really excited about the Gong business. And then also the opportunity to connect with other sellers. And that was pretty much where it was a done deal where I then came on as an SDR, moved up from the ranks from there. So my journey has definitely been very, obviously sales, that's been the job I've been in this entire time. But it's been also very much, the types of people that you connect with along the way. And honestly, just working with sellers, it's been a really exhilarating ride as well. So I've definitely enjoyed the experience so far. And that's ultimately what brought me into working in sales at the end of the day. I think it's a very inspiring group of people. That's what kind of keeps bringing me back to it. But also when you're selling a product and platform that you're really excited about, that just adds more to it. But I promise I won't keep it a Gong pitch for this conversation. We'll keep it sales focused. But that's ultimately what brought me onto the scene and honestly keeps me here as well is I think it's just a very exhilarating space to be in. You just connect with the best people, both on the internal side as well as customer side as well. So I've enjoyed it so far. So I'm still here. We'll see how it goes, but that's my journey into it.
That's awesome. Well, and I think it's interesting because, there's a lot of pressure in the world of sales. And there's, say, a disproportionate amount of people. I like to say in my nicest voice that 50% of the salespeople in the world, even though I work with salespeople all day long, don't really have the basic skill sets to be successful. So what's interesting is I noticed when I was doing my research once again that you've been 100% a quota from the get. When you were an SDR, when you were over at Transit, when you were moving into Gong, you've been President's Club, you've done all this stuff. How'd you get started like that? There's a lot of people. SDR is one of the hardest positions on the planet. How'd you get started, and how are you able to maintain those types of results?
One thing that when I was also preparing for this conversation that really came to mind is oftentimes, we say in real estate, location, location, location. Yeah. I feel with your career, it's stakeholders, stakeholders, stakeholders. The people that you're working with are ultimately really are what's going to, when you look at even folks on LinkedIn and you're wow, how did they get from here to there? There must have been so many individuals that they were constantly navigating, working with, collaborating with within those businesses. And we just don't see that story when you look on LinkedIn, right? So ultimately, I think that's been something that I've been insanely grateful with. And one thing that we talk a lot about Gong, but this is not unique to us, this is consistent, I would say, for most, high-performing organizations, is that you ultimately want to be on the right ship. And so I've been really lucky where I've been able to work with post series funding, organizations like Candid Screen, moving into Gong, and then even at Gong, I was working within the enterprise market. I was working more SMB. Now I'm in senior mid market. So you really connect and work with a ton of different people across that journey. But I think more specifically internally. So again, when you do see people that have had these crazy, wow, they're just picking up promotion after promotion, it also comes down to all the people they're working with internally. And like even, for my initial days at Transit Screen, I had some incredible mentors there. Peter Zaroulis, Mike Davis were like amazing advocates for myself when I was with that.
So tell me what was different about them, right? Because clearly there's a problem in the world today where not everybody's great.
Yeah, exactly.
We wish, but so tell me about them. Give me some specifics. Let's open up the kimono, as they say, and tell me a little bit about what were some of the specific things they did to contribute so that others can look for those types of traits in leadership when they're, say, moving positions.
I think that's a great subject to double down on because similar to that concept, like location, not all locations are created the same. Not all stakeholders are created the same. But I would say for like just using Mike and Peter as an example, and obviously I'll tag them back in this podcast as they've been great leaders to work with, is ultimately like they are folks that I enjoyed partnering with because I felt we both had a natural synergy around how holistic they were looking at the process. So it wasn't just like, hey, let's close this deal and lock this in. It's like, let's think about more holistically, like what are the customer problems that we're solving for? What's really going to get them to want to move forward? Not in an overly stressed out, intense way, but like, let's just properly think this through. And I really found like that was a space where I was able to thrive within that. Then moving into Gong, Nadine Juran was an incredible SDR manager that I partnered with. I felt like she really worked with me similarly on like, let's just take a step back and like think of the whole process and kind of allowing like, honestly, my intellectual curiosity to wander from there. Brian Ye was a enterprise rep that I had partnered with when I was an SDR. He's now a manager at another business, but ultimately he's been fantastic to work with in terms of like, again, just allowing that like natural intellectual curiosity. So I think what I'm trying to get at here is that like, ultimately you want to partner with leaders that kind of, obviously they're on their own track where they have their own ambition, but ultimately you also match what they want to bring to the table as well. And then since my journey at Gong, I've then also I started working remotely in the DC area. Then I moved to Dublin, Ireland, which where I'm calling you all in from now. And in that journey, that's opened me up to a whole new series of leaders here within Dublin as well. Leslie Ronaldson, Sam Stevens there, as well as like Wendy Harris has been incredible to work with. So you're seeing all these different leaders, their styles, and ultimately, I think just like as you get more and more in your career, I felt like early on, I just really needed a space where like I could express that kind of natural curiosity within the sales process and have that space.
Give me an example of what that is. You've said natural curiosity a few times. And one I don't want to do is walk by it and assume that everybody understands what you mean by it.
Yeah. So I think for like, again, this is very like personal. It's like my style, like my background within, Francophone studies, even like looking at like urban planning or whatever I was excited. I just wanted to get curious about it. So when you think about a sales cycle, thinking specifically about the conversations you're having, what are the questions that you're asking that are pulling out what you need ultimately from that customer? What's going to get them to open up to you about what they're looking for in a partnership to ultimately understand like what's going to move the needle in this going forward. I think that's something that in sales we gloss over sometimes a bit too much, where it's just like, ask these questions, qualifying them in, and then, forecast a deal and then you're kind of done with it. There's a whole dance to it. And I think really understand that art of the conversation, which kind of makes sense why I ended up more moving towards Gong as a career as well. But like just getting curious about that, like what are those probing questions that are, respectful, to their business, but also kind of pull at some things that might be concerns for them going forward as well. So that kind of like natural curiosity has been something that I've really appreciated from leaders and like letting me sort of express that. But I think then ultimately when you think about, I'm now entering, I think I've been working now for, I'm still very early in my career, but 4 to 5, 6 years into it, it's like, well, then how do I then elevate myself with other leaders as well that would be more senior within the business as well? So now I've kind of figured out what I'm good at. I've been able to demonstrate that, within the workspace with different stakeholders internally. But how can I now expand upon that with folks within product, more senior sales leaders within the organization, as well as, how we partner with a post-sale experience, really just widen that scope ultimately. So I think that's the piece.
So one of the things I'm hearing you say is that you're moving into the idea of, I'm going to say this wrong and somebody's going to yell at us. It's almost that what you're doing is you're not taking for granted what we would say in the old days was the political component of career. And nowadays with remote work, we tend to see, I think, is people just put their heads down and, they take the dog out in the morning and pick the kids up from school, and we've isolated ourselves. So I don't know if you're in office or out of office, but how are you making sure that you're developing genuine relationships, not only within kind of the immediate sales management structure that you're under, but throughout the organization?
Such a good point as well. And honestly, I think it's one that I maybe forget too, because like we're in office quite frequently here in Dublin for EMEA, for Gong EMEA, whereas in the US where we're more remote, so it's a bit more spread out. I would say though that, when it comes to those pieces, it's so underrated. And honestly, I don't do it enough. This is something that I'm always like trying to push myself to do more of anyway. So I just want to call out, no one does this perfectly. But those little 15-minute syncs with folks you haven't connected before, just have a chat. Yeah, sometimes maybe those conversations can feel repetitive because you're introducing yourself kind of over and over again. And as someone who's moved country, like I've definitely had a healthy amount of conversation where it's like, okay, I'm constantly having to reintroduce myself. But those can be such valuable conversations because you ultimately just lay that foundation with that person and then you can just build upon it going forward. And I mean, there's a ton of stuff online that constantly talk about, putting yourself out there, networking. And there's a reason why that is the consistent piece of advice and feedback that gets circulated. So I think it can be sometimes like a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a bit repetitive, but I feel like it always pays off. And it's also one of those things, similarly to sales, where it's not like you need every single conversation to like blow it out of the water, right? Like we just like need, if you do 5 to 10 interviews within your organization and you're a remote worker and 2 or 3 of those are really impactful, that's 2 or 3 that you wouldn't have had otherwise, but you just had to do a little bit more of like that upfront work. So I think that like what you call out there around remote working and how we navigate in this new environment is so incredibly fair. I think it's just a matter of also just doing some of that work up front, which again, just to reiterate, I could also be better about this. It's a constant process. It's always changing.
You're obvious, but you're thinking about it.
Exactly.
You're cognizant of it. So tell me this. So let's get specific for a second here, because there is somebody listening to this podcast at the exact moment, right? And they're going, well, that's great, Lorraine, but what do I say? It's a 15-minute chat. Like when you go into it, what does that look like just from a structure perspective? How do you go in that and you know that you're going to do X, Y, and Z? You're going to ask this question. What does that look like for you so we can give somebody some tactical ways to go ahead and apply that?
Yeah, I think like to start, like one, before you're even getting on that call, before you're even sending that note to someone, like just know that your name and reputation exists out there. Someone has some sense of you, depending on obviously the size of your organization. Here at Gong, I think we're pushing like maybe 1,300 folks globally right now. So someone has probably maybe seen Lorraine's name circulate. Obviously more on the sales side than maybe product side, but
well, you're a salesperson, so everybody outside of sales probably hates you.
They're like, why does she keep flagging us? Why is she constantly with a million questions? There's a couple of those, but I think just knowing before you even get on the call, like you do have reputation within this organization. And this is just an opportunity for you to build upon it. So just like know that before you're even, sending the Slack or scheduling the meeting. And then I think once you do get on that conversation, obviously, one quick introduction, and I think you just say super candidly, also, I'm newer to the organization, or I've been here for, even 9-10 months. Really just looking to learn from, our team specifically within your focus. And then I think from there, just hearing them out of like what they care about, what they're focused on. And one thing that I always, and then of course, obviously, if you're talking around golf or someone's dog or whatever, like keep the conversation fluid there. But I think the number one piece to extract out of that too is just asking the question like, hey, you work in customer success, product, whatever that looks like what could I be doing in my role to make your job easier? Even if there's literally no connection at all, I think that's sometimes a nice thing to add on to it. And just to understand, even if there is no connection, just showing that you're thinking about that, I think can be really impactful. And that was one thing that I definitely did more like early days in my time at Gong. Again, I would say that that's something that, I could be better about expanding upon that because our organization is also shifting and changing all the time. But I think those are huge pieces. And then again, you're just setting yourself up to have more of those like stakeholders going forward. Should you need help on a deal or just, a bit of advice on how to navigate internal conversations or anything else you would need to progress yourself and ultimately the business going forward as well.
Let's do this. I want to change tracks on you just a little bit because in the pre-show talk we talked a little bit that there are some realities of sales that people aren't really talking about, right? I mean, 75% of sellers, according to the data we've got, missed quota in the first half of this year. You've been able to continue to achieve, which puts you in kind of rare air to some extent. But there's a lot going on from the pressures that are coming at you, because you not only have to maybe sell a deal externally, but then you got to sell your team internally on why it's a good deal and why it was priced this way, or all these kind of things. But there's a lot of pressure that comes, and there's a lot of pressure that comes on, if I perform, I think we see reps go, well, to perform, I have to overwork. And if I overwork, I have to give up life. How do you balance kind of all of that mess to, take care of the fact that there are some real challenges, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're still living?
Totally. Well, I think one, to address like the first half of the question there around like shift in environment, how things are changing. I think really having a clear sense of where the gaps are within your current pipelines and deals today, and boxing those off immediately. And of course, asking for help where needed. So I definitely look at my deal board, start and finish of every day. I then kind of have like a side Excel sheet where I might like punch some numbers just to get a sense of what's happening within opportunities, and start to get my mind thinking around like, where are those gaps? And just be 24/7 super clear on what they are, because they're always going to be changing. But just make sure that's boxed off across the board all the time. And then in terms of like outside of work, like I would definitely say that when I initially came over from the US to Dublin, Ireland with a team here, like I definitely was a bit, I'll say, and I know folks are going to listen back to this and be like, obviously, yes, Lorraine, we noticed, a bit too heads down, let's say. Like, yeah. I obviously, gave it my all, left nothing, unturned, hit all of my annual numbers, for the year every time that I was, within the team. Last year was especially strong on that front as well. But then I also have kind of noticed that like I would have a better time and more success should I actually like take some time outside of work as well. So also, since I feel like in our office here, there's a lot of golf folks, a lot of tennis folks as well. I've recently joined like a tennis club near where I live right now. I tried with golf lessons. I'm not going to lie, Ken, it's actually so hard. Like I totally understand why people are addicted to it in the best of ways, because it can be a bit, it's definitely a bit of a mental game there. But I think that just like making time for those are so critical, because like I said, you're already 24/7 trying to keep top of mind of all the gaps within your current deals and like what you need to build upon. So you really do need to have things that just like, that's why golf is so great and tennis is so great. You're kind of like forced to like look at, a tennis court or a course, look at some greenery just to be outside and like not so plugged into it. So I think those are kind of like the big gaps I would say. And then I would definitely recommend, folks do things that are, socially focused as well. So like I do a little bit of running on the weekends as well, but it's very much like within a social context. So I'm not, trying to do like a 50-miler or something. Respect for folks that do that. But, I'm just kind of more there just like for the chats too. So just keeping it open like that, I think is so, so critical, because the deals will come. Like if you're thinking about them in the right way, and again, working with your internal stakeholders and being super responsive in your execution, they will come. And I think that confidence and not being within like a scarcity mindset then allows you to open up for other parts of your life, which are critical, because you're a complete person and all of you should be there. Right. So that's how I think about it today.
Tell me this. So, you were at President's Club in 24, you just received a promotion here in the last 2 months. By the time this airs, we'll be at the end of the year. Tell me when you look forward and you go, okay, next calendar year, what are you most concerned about? What are the biggest challenges that you see in being not only to be able to be successful in your job, but also to actually feel like you're successful in life?
So one thing that I've actually more so only like recently gotten more into is doing a bit more around like different sort of like self-tests around like where do your skill sets like lie. So like one test that I was kind of like looking into was like an aptitude test around like what are some of the ways that you're just sort of like naturally wired in terms of how you problem solve and things of that nature. I think for me, a big thing that I'm focused on over the next like 9 to 12 months, let's call it, is really just drilling in on like, what is Lorraine really good at? And what does Lorraine really love doing? Because that's the best part about sales, is that you get to do so many different things. Obviously you're closing deals, but you're having all types of conversations. So, things can be shifted around within a deal. You have to engage so-and-so. There's so much. Like you really do become, like we call it over here at Gong, like the CEO of your own business, because there's so many different things you're balancing at the same time. But ultimately, I think I'm now kind of hitting the stage where it's like, okay, I think maybe I've been a bit more on, trying to be that sponge, taking everything, maybe a bit reactive because I don't have that context of exactly what needs to happen here and there. But now I'm kind of like, I really want to drill into like, what are the things that I love to do? What are the things that I'm really good at doing? And what are the things that ultimately bring the most value to the business? So I think, for me, that's definitely just like drilling into what those look like. And then ultimately, like obviously, would love to continue, crushing numbers, expanding from there. But I do sometimes find when you have like that kind of larger, maybe a little bit nebulous goal, you can kind of stretch yourself a little bit more because you're not just so bogged down into, oh, I have to hit this target because I have to get to President's Club or I have to, hit 200%. It's like it's actually what we were talking about there earlier. You're a complete person. You should have all parts of your life, open for growth, expansion, fun. And so I think that that's kind of how I'm thinking about the next like phase here. And I know one thing that we were also going to speak around was like, how many shifts there are within the market as well. It's like just thinking through again, like what are the things that you bring unique value to in your sales cycles and just making sure that you're adaptable to how things, are going to shift, evolve, change as well over the next couple months.
What are you expecting the changes will be? So as an example, in October of 22, we saw enterprises start to kind of shut down spending for a minute. And we've seen that soften across like IT consulting and other areas. I know when it comes to roles or positions like your companies like yours, like Salesforce is an example. They came out in their annual report, or not their annual report, in their investors briefing for their quarterly earnings. And they said, hey, we're not seeing companies go back and hire near as many sales reps as they used to. So like the per seat thing, like, are you worried about the average number of seats now that you're going into mid-markets coming down? Because that's going to affect your overall number. I mean, what are those market changes that you all are preparing for right now so you can be successful next year?
For sure. And that's definitely a piece too. Like, I mean, we operate on like a per seat basis. So naturally when I look at, an account that I'm working with, I'll think about, what is that, like that scope that we could be working in within that partnership. I would say though that I think it's going to really depend on every account that you're working with. But I think ultimately really prioritizing what is the reason why, like being very clear on like why this customer is going to buy. Like, what are we very specifically solving for? And then being very confident in that ROI ultimately going forward. And then once that's boxed off, just remove every concern that they would have in moving forward. Like one thing that Mike Davis, again, one of my first sales leaders that I worked with, or the first sales leader that I worked with, the Jolt method was one thing that we were speaking around. I'll be transparent. I haven't actually read through the full book there, but ultimately just like thinking through within, again, back to like, just being very clear of what's happening within your deals. Like what concerns do people have before they want to move forward with you? And so when you think about what needs to, get done over the next like 6 to 9 months or shifts within the market, how can you literally remove every single concern that they have before they actually need to move forward with you all? So I'm a big fan of Chris Orlov's content as well. And he has some good stuff on this around like, how do you, think about getting it down to like, what are the actual like concerns they do have? Maybe it's not price related, maybe it's implementation related, maybe it's ROI related, but like get down to those pieces so that you as a rep can remove those.
So which objections do you think are going to be the objections that maybe you've seen a little bit, but you would anticipate over the next 6 to 12 months will become much more significant?
I think my sense of things is that pricing is going to come up as the initial objection, but I think the reality behind that is more around return on the price that they're spending. So if someone is spending $1,000 with you, are they confidently able to say they're getting $5,000 back in that spend? And the way that happens isn't just a product perspective. That comes down to implementation, certain ways that we deploy the technology, making sure that when we deploy the technology, are we focusing it on the top 1 or 2 things that you care about as a business? Or are we just kind of like blanket, launching it across the board and kind of hoping for the best? And I think that's a piece that I've definitely tried to get more specific around. So I think just to kind of like drill into that a bit more specifically, it's like, okay, pricing is your concern, but it's really more around like the ROI that you're getting. So what are the 1 or 2 things that you care about most as a business so that we can front load those in your implementation or how we deploy this with you going forward? That's a very like general way of thinking about it, but this is something that I'm definitely focusing on with new business, but I would even say existing customers, because even within, which is how we currently operate here at Gong as a business, I have a combination of existing and new business customers. Like stakeholders, again, change, they shift, priorities also change, and businesses have to pivot. So how can we as a technology partner make sure that we keep doubling down on the most relevant parts for that business? And I think that does require a little bit extra work. It does require maybe some like tough, uncomfortable questions, because maybe your technology doesn't actually solve what's most important to them. In which case, that's also kind of okay, because at least you're now aware of it. And so you can prioritize that accordingly. Just to use like an example of this, I even had a conversation with someone just this last month. They were more concerned around like CRM hygiene, which isn't something that Gong directly does, but there are parts within the platform that we can kind of tweak to better align to what they care about. So, were we solving their number one mission critical priority? Not exactly, but we were able to actually align in a way that they're extra confident in the ROI, because we've actually been able to get down to their real concern, which is like, are we actually maximizing the solution that we're paying for today? So those are like, I guess, things that I would think about, or I am thinking about within my current and future businesses that we be partnering with, because ultimately that's where you want to be set up for success there.
Well, and I think what you're doing is you're talking about something that's pretty interesting, because we see it all the time with teams where, okay, it's much later than the 1800s, and still what they're doing is they're telling you about the bells and whistles within their software, right? Hey, here's my thing. Look at how easy it is to log in. And if you click this button, this happens. And did you know that we can give you prettier PDFs? And so what's interesting what you're talking about, and you almost talked past it because for you it's not a consideration, but I think it's something we got to make sure we call out is, instead of just trying to meet somebody's tactical needs, they said they wanted better CRM hygiene, right? You come in and you go, okay, but why do you need that? Because then what you did is you then aligned this need they say they have today, that's a high priority, to how you can help them get to this kind of 12-month goal. Instead of just like, well, hey, we can plug in and then you don't have to use something that doesn't. Does that make sense? Like, you're looking for you're trying to go past the initial ask in most cases and look for a bigger business problem.
Completely. And like one thing that a line that I use all the time, but I also don't even know if it always gets to like the core of what I'm looking for within a deal, is like a lot of times people will come to Gong being like, oh, I'm trying to improve my coaching. And my response back to that is, well, no one coaches just to coach. So what exactly are the outcomes you're trying to drive? Similarly for like the data hygiene, like no one does data hygiene just because they want to do, no one implements a new CRM just because they want to. Like businesses don't operate that way. There's always a why. Yeah, exactly. There's always like that deeper piece behind it. And sometimes then like I get a response back where it's like, oh, well, we just like really need our reps to like set next steps. We're just not doing that within our deals. Yeah. Okay, well, then it's on you as a rep. And this is where I really try to keep myself accountable to is, okay, well, why are next steps so important to your deals? You and I both know that's almost a silly question, because obviously next steps are important to any sales cycle, but that can look really differently across businesses. Maybe it's because, my assumption would be that it's because you have less urgency within the deals, but also maybe it's because we're not looping in the right stakeholders. Like there can be a lot of different reasons why next steps are a problem area, but it's so important to hear that back from the customer. And that's because ultimately, if I just come with my perspective of like, oh, well, I imagine like it's hard to drive urgency if you don't have next steps, that might not be, they might be like, yeah, that is fair. But also it might be something more specific in their world. So I think, again, it's just kind of drilling into those examples. I'd be curious to see how maybe some partners that I've worked with so far, I'd be like, did Lorraine actually do that with us? So again, it's one of those things where like you definitely, I'm always thinking about it within my deals, but you also want to be honest with yourself of like, am I surfacing that up enough within those conversations as well? So again, it's always a process, something to build upon. And obviously we just want to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable to deliver upon that ultimately.
That's great. Well, as we kind of get to the end here, I've got a couple more questions for you, but I want to make sure that, one of the things I think people struggle with is, particularly in the remote world, which is a lot of the world still, right? That sales reps in general are trying to figure out, how do I know that I'm winning before I actually get my deals in? And so I would guess, based on your success, you've got a pretty specific way you look at, planning out your goals for the day and the week. What does your daily or weekly routine look like that somebody else might be able to learn from?
Yeah, I would say like on a daily basis, like I'm always starting and ending my day within my deal boards. So like looking at my open deals, like what are things that I can move the needle on? What has happened again, just to kind of get a recap. Obviously, I'm using a lot of Gong to do that. But ultimately, I'm just trying to figure out like where do I need to spend my time. Once I've kind of boxed those off, I then try to action those immediately. So like within like the first hour or two that I'm like at my desk. Um, and then from there, I'll think about like once I've taken those steps and those actions, maybe I've already gotten some feedback from customers as well. Then I'll think about what are some of the backlog things that I want to then tack on for later in the day. And what I mean by that is like, what are the accounts that I'm going to prospect into? Who are the people I need to get in front of? So I'll bake that in at some point within the day as well. And then of course, like when it comes to preparing for those conversations, like I do have like a bunch of Evernotes for everything kind of mapped out where I'll map out this is what I want to cover off in this conversation, what I need to do to prepare and execute on those. And then of course, if there's anything internal that I have to have a conversation around, those obviously will take place as well. But that's pretty much like the routine that I have from that standpoint. I think it's really, I think when you're in a good, like to your question there, like what are those leading indicators without me having, because obviously, you close the deal, but there's a lot of things that happen before you actually get there. I feel like I feel my best when I know the amount of risk in my deals. Like when I am honest with myself of what's actually happening, then I feel good. Because if you're honest with yourself and you're like, yeah, I got like maybe 3 deals in the pipeline, but like none of them are looking that great, that then lights the fire into your belly of like, okay, well now let me go actually, get more coverage because I don't have what I need within those. Or you're like, actually, these deals are like really airtight. I feel really good. I just want to really lock those ones in. And let me just also keep in mind things within the back as well. So I think for me, I think all of us know what the answer is, but it's knowing like where are you at in the journey and like being honest with yourself. I feel like is more where I tend to spend more time. So it's not like maybe my manager will probably be like, Lorraine, we need like 5x coverage, which we definitely need. But I think for me, it's also just like really being super clear that I can communicate back to like leadership and others, like where things are at within my pipeline, which is hard depending on the scale and scope of the projects that you're working in. But like, that's really where I try to ultimately spend, like, if not all my time, on top of prospecting, of course.
Yeah, do you have any daily metrics? Like you want to talk to a certain amount of people or have a certain number of meetings each week, or you have like any couple like leading metrics that you watch for yourself?
Yeah. So, I don't know if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs at all. My personality type is an ENFP. So I'm not great with structure. It's pretty much what that type is. So I like having flexibility and I'm not as like detail oriented. But I love a big picture and I love mission and like that's the things like I can wrap my head around. So for me, someone pretty senior within our organization, she's one of our like top enterprise reps that we have here. She has like a general rule of thumb where like having at least 3 to 4 customer interactions every day is what she holds herself accountable to. If you can achieve that, you've done what you needed to achieve for that day. And of course, if you don't have that happening, then you can close that gap. And I feel like sometimes again, everyone's super different, but I think in general, my experience with sales reps that I've worked with, and I think people that are ultimately attracted to this profession, a lot of them are very like big picture, mission driven folks. You have some sellers who are like super detail oriented and like are able to hold themselves to those metrics.
Well, we all have ADD.
Well, I do, but there's just always like that element of being a little bit like, yeah, like we're a little bit like, like I guess I don't want to say scattered, but like there's a lot of things that are in flight. So when you do have that and you try to put a lot of structure around it, it's sometimes not the best use of that energy. So I do find that just having like 3 to 4 customer interactions a day, try out a couple metrics of like maybe 20, 30 dials, 10 to 15 super high focus, high personalization emails. Don't do like I'm not a fan of pray and spray at all. Like just do very specific high impact conversation and interactions, and then you can kind of take it from there. So I think those are ultimately the things that I hold myself to. But again, there's always like, I feel like we could have this conversation like a year or 2 from now, Ken, and it's going to be like a whole new landscape because the way that people, buy or sell, I think will change so much in the next like, even the next year. Again, like it's going to evolve very quickly. So just keep adaptable and be kind to yourself. 3 to 4 interactions a day. I think that's super achievable. But if you're consistent at it, that's the real key, I would say.
Yeah, and that hasn't changed in decades. That's
exactly.
That's a litmus test that went back it's gone back decades. So I'm going to give you a phrase that I give to high performing sellers that you can steal from me that I promise you'll like better than ADD or any other term that says I just like big picture and I hate details. Ready?
Let's go for it.
You're comfortable in the chaos. You can sit in the eye of the storm while everything else is blowing at a crazy pace around you and be at complete peace. And you can steal that, and that's about as eloquent as I actually get. So you've got it all from me today. That was the end of that. Well, Lorraine, I love the fact you're able to come. It's been fantastic learning about what's helped you be successful, what you see happening, and kind of your outlook on the world of sales. If somebody wants to get in touch with you because they were inspired by you, which, by the way, do that, people, because people love to know that they're inspiring others, what's the best way for them to do that?
Definitely feel free to reach out to me over LinkedIn. Would love to connect there. DM me, whatever it is. I'm pretty responsive from there. I think also my contact information is on my LinkedIn as well. So happy to have a chat. I do really love these types of conversations because I feel like they kind of, I may be calm in the chaos, but like it's also nice to kind of like try a different part of my brain when I'm, obviously doing the work, right? So I feel these conversations are always like a really nice like refresh, just like kind of rethink back of like, what do I care about? What do I want to prioritize, et cetera. So always happy to have a chat with folks. And this has been a fantastic conversation as well, Ken. You made me like think a lot about a lot of components that are also out there in the market because it's very easy to get tunnel vision as well as a seller. So it's nice to kind of like have a little bit of perspective of what's happening out there and, what you're doing ultimately to show up at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So do reach out to Lorraine. I am positive that we'll have all the LinkedIn stuff in the show notes below this. So that way you can just click on a link and it's super easy to get in contact. But Lorraine Pettit, second promotion at Gong within the last 3 years, consistently a top performer. And she's giving you a lot of value today. So I hope that you take some of these things, pick exactly one thing, go apply it today, and watch your sales world change. Thanks for joining the Candid Sales Rep Podcast. We'll see you soon.